Well, first let me introduce myself. All my life I've been an auditor through many changing times. In all of those times, corporate governance has been very important to me, not just in the way in which I audit, but also what I audit in organizations. I've worked in public sector organizations, I've worked in manufacturing companies, multi-manufacturing companies across the world, and since 1991 I've been a visiting professor at 3 universities. During my working life in the manufacturing, I was an internal auditor, auditing not just financial statements, but operational systems, organizational structures, all covered by principles of good management and governance, not just those that are published today in corporate governance codes, but those that have been in existence for many years, long before corporate governance became a significant issue across all sectors, not just in the United Kingdom, but across the world. Been involved very much in the professional development of internal auditors internationally through my professional institutes, and in the 1970s I was president of the Institute of Internal Auditors in the United Kingdom and have worked in that institute for many years. My professional life has been almost for 50 years as a chartered secretary, not just as a company secretary, but as a chartered secretary involved in the corporate governance of organizations in the United Kingdom. During my academic life, I've published many research papers on aspects of auditing and corporate governance, and also published 2 books on internal auditing and its contribution to good governance in organizations across all sectors. And I've taught many students at undergraduate, postgraduate and doctorate levels. And always I've found an enthusiasm to see that best practices are adopted in an organization or in a research project or in a learning program. In all of these roles, I've seen that there is a significant contribution that everyone can make to good corporate governance as we see it today, and hopefully we will see it tomorrow. And this is evidence that we all can have a contribution to make during our working lives in how organizations govern themselves, and how countries govern themselves, and how the world governs itself, today and tomorrow. The question we should all ask ourselves is why corporate governance is so important today. There can be very few countries in the world today that are not aware of the significance of good corporate governance, not just in their economies, but also in the way their societies operate and develop. Why corporate governance today? We could go back centuries and see aspects of corporate governance in almost every country in the world, but it wasn't at that time called corporate governance. It was more often called good organization and good methods. And it was that good organization and good methods which created most of the industrial revolutions we've seen across the world, and most of the good governance practices by governments across the world. Many today see corporate governance as being just a matter of trust not just between organizations, but between individuals within organizations and individuals across organizations, often generated by legal systems, but more often than not generated by good values and principles that have been adopted across the world. But it's more than just trust. Good governance is about having the organization and methods which create confidence in that trust. And it's the organization and methods of organizations in all sectors which are so important today to the good practice of corporate governance. Now, by organization, I mean the way in which managers organize themselves structurally across organizations, their span of delegation and the way in which they delegate their responsibilities to achieve the visions and missions and strategic planning that they have in the organization and the success and performance of the organization. So corporate governance has a significant role to play in the way in which organizations manage themselves and they structure themselves. By methods, I mean that the methods used in organizations, the systems and the procedures, whether they're formal or informal, are very important in the way in which corporate governance is managed. Without the right systems, organizations will not have good governance. So it's very important to have not just digital systems, but all the procedures and practices which will aim for the best governance of the organization. Surrounding all of the organization and methods of an organization are the engagement that organizations have with their stakeholders. Now, stakeholders today receive considerable focus, not just by governments, but by international associations such as the United Nations and many of the worldwide associations concerning the sustainability not just of the planet but of the climate. There are many stakeholders that organizations have external to the organization, but we also tend to forget that organizations have a lot of internal stakeholders, the employees themselves and their communities in which they live. And in those organizations which require investment, the investors in an organization need the confidence and trust through good corporate governance to continue to invest in the performance of the organization. So there are many people, many organizations who have considerable interest in the way an organization is governed and how best that is achieved at each level of the organization, at board level, at executive level, and at operational level. So why should organizations care about good governance? Organizations are stewards of the resources that they have and how they use those resources for the benefit not just of the success of the organization, but of the success of the communities in which the organization operates, and in fact even beyond that, to the success of the economy of the world and how the resources of the planet are sustained. There is a lot of evidence today across the world that this sustainability of the planet and how organizations contribute to that is an essential part of the success of the future of the planet and all those who will live on it in the future. So organizations are stewards, not of just their resources, but the resources of the planet. And to be good stewards, they've got to have good corporate governance in the organizations. They've got to be able to demonstrate very clearly that they are managing their affairs so that they are contributing to not just the success of their performance, but also the effect they're having on all their stakeholders across all the countries in which they operate. Governance of any organization starts at the board level. The skills and the effectiveness of the board are essential for good corporate governance in an organization. But corporate governance is not just at board level, it is at executive level, across an organization, and it is also in every operations of an organization. The quality and the efficiency and the effectiveness and the economy of all the operations in an organization are essential if good corporate governance is to exist in that organization. I mentioned earlier that in my working life I was mainly an internal auditor, working in 2 manufacturing companies. Internal auditing is not a new profession. In fact, in this country, in the United Kingdom, there's evidence that internal auditors were recognized first in local government, in the local authorities, all of whom would develop internal audit departments to audit the procedures and practices and accounts of the organizations that they were working in. But internal auditing goes back in history almost to Egypt, in the dynasties in Egypt, and it may even go back before that. There have always been checkers, people who checked what other people did. And it may not have been called internal auditing, but that checking or verification and evaluation of evidence has been around for centuries. Today, we call internal auditors professional internal auditors. The profession of internal auditing was established first in the United States in the 1940s, when a group of internal auditors in companies in the United States gathered together to share the progress of the development of their work. Since then, the Institute of Internal Auditors, based in the United States, has now spread to some 150 countries across the world, and it now has a membership of 180,000 people working in internal auditing, not just in the private sector, but in the public sector and also in the charitable sectors. So it's internal auditing is big business. And professional internal auditing, those that seek professional qualifications to become internal auditors, is now a very highly paid career for many people. I led the development of internal auditing in this country in the 1970s and was president of the affiliated Institute of Internal Auditors in this country at that time. And I'm still involved in the development of professional internal auditing today. Internal auditors today are seen by the stakeholders and regulators of organizations through the work of audit committees in many organizations, and are seen as a very important assurance activity and are inspected often by regulators as to the quality of their work and how they operate within the organizations and contribute to the implementation and establishment of corporate governance. I've published 2 books on professional internal auditing, one in the 90s called Leading Edge Internal Auditing, and one in 2008, Cutting Edge Internal Auditing. And in each of these books I discussed how internal auditors contribute to a variety of operations and aspects of an organisation, but primarily to how they contribute at board level to good corporate governance. Corporate governance is often seen as a new subject for academics to teach and research. But in fact, there are many aspects of corporate governance that are taught across all faculties in a university. It is not difficult to pick up a prospectus for a university and see many issues that corporate governance addresses in teaching and research by academics and visiting lecturers at a university. In fact, universities themselves are required to have good corporate governance, and their organisation and methods is evaluated externally by their own investors and those that fund the activities of universities. There are many publications on corporate governance, its principles and practices. There are not that many on the policies that organisations should follow on corporate governance. These publications are many published by academics and practitioners in the way in which governance is implemented and established in an organisation. I have one in front of me which is just a simple title, Corporate Governance, Principles, Policies and Practices, 3rd edition, which implies it's not going to go away and it's always going to be evolving in new ways across the world. I first entered academia in 1991. And at that time I was teaching internal auditing as an undergraduate program. Following that learning program of my own, I started to teach at postgraduate level corporate governance in a master's program, which was developed in collaboration with the Institute of Chartered Secretaries and Administrators. That corporate governance program brought together many aspects of corporate governance which were already being taught in different faculties in the university. And in fact, if you study the prospectus of most universities, you will find aspects of corporate governance being taught across all faculties in the university. So the teaching of corporate governance and the research of corporate governance is not new. What is new is it's now being brought together in one learning program. And that learning program is a very important part of the contribution universities and academia can make to the development of corporate governance in practice across organizations in all sectors. And that contribution will grow as the research develops in universities in good governance, and the impact of that research goes out into the world and into the growth of economies and into the sustainability of the resources that the planet provides for us all. We buy the future of corporate governance today. What we do today will influence very strongly how corporate governance is practiced, not just in our own countries, but across the world. How we study, how we learn, how we practice corporate governance is an essential part of how it will develop in the future. And it will develop in the future. It has been developing now for the past at least 30 years, and it will go on changing each year as more and more stakeholders become interested in how organizations are governed, the ethics of the organization, and how much trust they can place in the organization's operations. We are all governed today by many organizations, institutions, and professions, all publishing regulations, rules, and standards, principles, and codes of practice. Without exception, all the products and services that we receive today have some form of regulation covering their manufacture and their contribution to the way in which we live. All this needs to be governed well if we are going to get the best out of the resources that we have in the world today. Standards and practices can be both prescriptive by law and regulation and principle-based. Principle-based standards and practices depend very much on theory, and the theories which we study and learn in universities, like stewardship theory, legitimacy theory, signalling theory, stakeholder theory, and many other different theories, can have a significant impact on the way in which principles are developed and theories are developed, and subsequently on the way in which standards and regulation are created. So as academics, we all have a very important role to play in the research that we carry out in how good governance will develop in the future. I'm looking at a magazine published by the Governance Institute in the United Kingdom. This is a magazine which has an article in it with the title, "Cutting Through the Noise, the Future of Governance." There's a lot in the future of governance, but in this article it specifically has a statement which says, "Good governance is a facilitator. It enables an organization to make better decisions and operate at its most effective and efficient." And when I was talking about organization and methods earlier, I mentioned about the importance of the methods in an organization. Measuring the methods in an organization should be through what we call now the 3 E's. How efficient are the methods, how effective are the methods, and how economic are the methods. And each of those 3 E's has a very significant importance for good corporate governance. We often forget that there is a difference between efficiency and effectiveness. Efficiency is all about doing things right the first time, and many of us don't do that. Effectiveness is about doing the right things, and many of us don't do that. And when I say many of us, I mean many organizations. The economy of what we do is very essential in every organization. In fact, the economy can have a significant impact on whether the organization survives or not. So each of those 3 E's is a very important part of good corporate governance in an organization. Each of those 3 will always have, or should always have, important key performance indicators, which are used as part of measuring whether governance in an organization is good. I've now been working for 70 years, and I've seen many changes in the way in which we operate in organizations and the way in which governments operate and the way in which the world has become a very much smaller part of our lives. How we travel, the technology of what we use, and the values that we use in our lives. As academics and as students, we all have a responsibility to ensure that the future of corporate governance, or should I say the future of governance, not just of corporate governance, it operates well for ourselves and for our families and for the many future generations that will follow. So good corporate governance is not just about organizations, it's about us and how we live and how we survive.